I've played 1,000 hours of Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO, in the past 3 months as of recording this video. I would have played more, but I have to make videos. My experience with the game right now is really nothing at all like it was during my first impressions video, which was recorded in just my first couple days of play. So in this video, I'll be talking about things that I've seen evolve, happen, and generally give you my impressions of the game 1,000 hours into it. One thing I want to say before I start talking about what I've seen and accomplished and done and experienced in this game in 1,000 hours is that if you played 1,000 hours of this game instead of me, you might be done with everything already, depending on how you play MMOs. I play MMOs probably very different compared to most players. I start MMOs hoping to experience the story, and only the story, like a casual MMO player would do. But I also engage in gear grind like the more hardcore 1% or less elite do. And in addition to that, I love role-playing with plots and just casual stuff, characters interacting, stories forming. And so I will tell you, my 1,000 hours has been pretty split between those 3 things because they've all been roughly equally accessible to me in the game. So the first thing I want to touch upon is something that I've kind of touched upon and have seen development in the previous videos I've made on this game, and that is how accessible the game has been to me. For example, I came in as a free-to-play player. I've now been subscribed. For me and my playstyle, I felt as I got through the base game on my first character that I was really being pushed into getting a subscription because more and more of the restrictions were becoming heavily inconvenient and getting in the way of my playstyle, preventing me from enjoying the game to its fullest. And so after a point, I just knew that I needed to subscribe. So the game's getting 15 bucks a month from me, and I'm subscribed now. This is not the only monetization. Other than the money I've spent on the sub, technically speaking, I've spent at this point, I think over $100 on the cash shop. These are rookie numbers, I know. In ESO, I spent over $1,000 on the cash shop in 2.2 thousand hours. I'm almost halfway to that. Haven't spent nearly half as much. And to be fair, most of it hasn't been my money. It's been viewers or friends giving me money specifically to spend on the cash shop. If you look up the development of Star Wars: The Old Republic over the past half a decade or so, you might find it maybe somewhat lacking, as expansions have apparently only released about 4 hours of new quests and 1 new dungeon, 1 new raid here or there. But don't worry, the devs have still been hard at work on the cash shop. This thing is filled with cosmetics. There's collections filled with cash shop and otherwise cosmetics temporarily or permanently available, with hundreds of options and selections, whether that's pets, that's outfits, that's emotes, you name it. You can buy $10, $15 dyes that are one use on one outfit only. So if you fill up all 16 of your outfit slots as a sub and you're using let's say one of the $10 dyes each, that's another $160 you have to spend just to put all those dyes on, and that's only at that price. Heck, there's quests in the cash shop. Did you know that? There are 19 pets in the cash shop. Each of these pets unlocks a quest, and if you want them all, that'll be $399. Whether you want your $50 weapon, your $20 lightsaber color, your $20 level skip that auto completes all the story in the game for you, or your $34 level skip that gives you a full set of max level gear and actually allows you to complete the story after the fact if you still want to. There's monetization in this game for everybody. From $20 pay to win to $34 pay to win and good starting point skip ahead on your end game gear grind, to all the $5 or $10 or $55, $60 cosmetic options you can bling your character out with. I guess what I'm trying to say is this game is very, very monetized. I hate it. But that's monetization for you. Let's talk about content now. In my experience, how much content is in this game and is it worth doing? That's something that I want to talk about. Focusing on the content I've been experiencing, which is primarily in the base game. If you separate the gear grind from that, we have 8 class stories, all the side quests on the Empire side, all the side quests on the Republic side, and all the planet quests on either of those sides. On one character doing all of these quests on each side as like a main character doing everything, you could experience about 100 hours of unique questing content. Every class story in itself is roughly, depending on if you're reading and listening to everything like I do, about 20 hours for each class story. So add that all together and you have at least 300 hours that you can get out of the game just doing these quests. There's also flashpoints that are story driven, so those are dungeons. Imagine if dungeons had actual quests and story. Well, that's what we have here. This is also a bad thing because flashpoints, depending on your playstyle, especially if you like to do gear grind, you'll be repeating flashpoints a lot, especially if you don't do raids. So you'll have to listen to all this dialogue and repeat all this again and again and again, and that can make experiencing the story of these flashpoints the first time actually very difficult for a solo player, because not all of them, some of them do, but not all of them, have soloable versions of themselves. Some of them you still need to do in a group. And there's this mentality in the game where some people just walk in and say, hit spacebar or I'm leaving. They have some sort of like initialized slang for this, but I forget what it is. Basically what they're saying is skip through all the dialogue, don't listen to any of this, or I'm leaving because fuck you. Or sometimes they don't make that clear upon joining the group, and then you go through the dungeon and then you get into some dialogue and then everyone or just one person starts saying SB, as in spacebar. This is usually also the kind of person that does every mechanic of the dungeon wrong, doesn't know the pulls, slows you down at every turn by fucking up left and right. But unfortunately, this is very prevalent in the game, and this kind of player is everywhere, making doing flashpoints in dungeons a very poor experience when you're doing them in a group. And again, not all the flashpoint stories are accessible solo. And no, you can't just over level and then do them yourself later to see the story if you're interested. You can't do that with any difficult content in the game, because in this game, it's level scaled, everything. You will be forced down to what the devs think you should be forced down to, stat-wise and level-wise, with some variable on the stats depending on the actual capabilities of your gear, especially if you're at the end game. So even if you're level 80 and you've beaten everything, killed gods, defeated dragons, I don't know, if you go back to the starting planet and you fight that level 10 guard that you had to kill earlier, he's going to be pretty much just as difficult to kill as when you were an acolyte or just a brand new dude that barely knew how to use a blaster, didn't even have his own blaster yet, depending on what story you're doing. And that guard will be able to kill you, the potential ultimate Sith Lord that, I don't know, might have his own several apprentices and an empire. I haven't gotten out of the base game, but some amazing Sith Darth Emperor, you know. Well, he'll be able to kill you just as easily as he could when you were an acolyte, and I think that fucking sucks. For some of the content in the game, that means you generally just have to get good or interact with other players to make things easier, and other players in this game generally aren't here to help you. They're here to rush you. Having trouble encountering stories because it's in dungeons, by the way, is not where the difficulty of encountering story ends in Star Wars: The Old Republic, because some of the story is in the raids too. Can you guess how many endgame do 4 raids every day players are going to let you sit there and watch a 5-minute long cutscene where you have interactive dialogue at the start of their daily gear grind? Take a guess. Take a guess how many groups let you do that. Cycling back to the more soloable content I've done, you know, the class stories, the planet stories, the side quests. I've done almost all of them. In fact, I'm wrapping up my final class story onlys, and then I will be on to the expansions. But let's talk about what's there in the base game. So it's your standard BioWare affair where you have a little dialogue wheel that tells you you're gonna say one thing, you select it, you say the exact opposite, come off as an asshole. The disconnect in writing comes to haunt you 80 hours down the line, and you have stupid consequences, all because they tried to summarize like a paragraph of a response in 2 words. The good thing is, almost all these quests are voice acted, so experiencing the story is very seamless. It doesn't really get as repetitive as just reading a bunch of nonsense, because the objectives themselves, I guess, could be a little bit repetitive, because so many of them are like, kill 10 of this, you know, just like any other MMORPG. Although this one has its own little twist to it. They don't just tell you to kill 10, they tell you to kill 10 of the enemy, but then spawn the enemies in groups of 3s so that you actually have to kill 12. And this is a common occurrence. I have not seen this pattern stop in the quests. It's always a number that you literally cannot do with normal pulls. And rather than standard aggro, this game has combat mode and non-combat mode. So once you pull a group, you're stuck fighting that group unless you run way out of the aggro range. The content itself is very recycled. You'll get very similar quests between the different class stories and side quests. You'll see the same exact locations a million times. You'll kill the same enemies with different names that look nothing like they look in the Star Wars universe a million times. For the year this game came out, this was pretty normal for MMOs, and the fact that they tried to make 8 different class stories makes this pretty understandable. But still, with how much they recycle even the environments, I'm just really surprised every time I go into, for example, one of the final areas of a class story, and there's just a tree clipping through the floor. Like, how has this been in the game for 12 years and nobody's fixed it? I'm hoping this somewhat changes once I get to the expansions, because they're linear and they don't really have a bunch of different things for every different class story and etc. So I'm hoping the streamlined content can hopefully end up being of a higher quality. I don't know how long the expansions are yet. I'm hoping all of them combined are like at least as long as the base game as I've experienced it so far. I don't know, because from what I've seen, the way they add content to this game is you get like 4 to 8 hours of new questing content every 2 years as part of some very minor expansion. Depending on how fast you consume content, once every year they add enough content to keep you busy for like a day. A lot of it comes down to them hoping that you'll just grind through reputations and other things like that. But even that can be done with pretty good time if you can even motivate yourself to do it. I've already completed what I believe to be some of the grindiest reputations in the game. Namely, I've run over 200 of those space flying missions, the ones that are on rails, to max out that reputation. And when you're not doing the hardest difficulty of it, it really does take over 200 runs, and I think that's over 100 hours of that mode for one reputation. It's safe to say I always wear the title that I got from that, because I want to advertise how much of my time I wasted. One weird thing about experiencing expansion content due to the streamlined nature of it versus the class story approach that they had in the base game is the fact that the game becomes very alt heavy in the base game. You need 8 different characters to experience every class story. That's not even alt friendly. Like I mentioned in my first impressions, I think, that's alt forced, and it feels kind of bad. It disconnects you, at least me, from the story, from feeling like I'm actually playing my character and getting immersed in the gameplay. The stories also have this like light and dark side system where the game's writers arbitrarily judge how good or bad of a person you are, but they do it completely inconsistently, where you can get essentially the same choice twice, which is like, do you help the law in enforcing the same exact law, but in 2 different class stories? In one of them, you will get light side points. In the other, you will get dark side points, and the context is hardly different. So that's pretty weird. All this content, this story content, is generally very easy, so you don't need to worry about gearing up too much, but gearing up is part of the content, and it's part of what I've done. and I've done a lot of it. As a result, I've gotten to experience raids and other things, and I have to say, I talked about how laggy and unoptimized this game was when I started the game, and I'm coming into this game with very good hardware from 2019, and when I go into group content like 16-man raids, or even worse, 24-man world bosses, the game becomes an unplayable slideshow. One inconvenience where it comes to gearing out your character as well and getting your skills set and everything is that this game has specs for your class, but it doesn't tell you that they exist. The game never told me that I could pick a spec. When I was level 15, it just automatically picked one for me. The best part is, I learned only recently that you can pick your spec at level 1. If you're in the right place or you have the right perk after playing the game for a long time. Right now, what I main is a Carnage Marauder. That is my spec and that is my class. The only reason I main this is because I was already so far into the levels before I figured out that specs existed just by going through my menus, because the game still hasn't taught me that they exist or how they work. This is starting to sound like it's turning into a ranting video, but that's kind of just how like playing video games works, right? You know, you get into it at the beginning, it's all like, ooh, this is so new and cool and amazing. And you play it more, and then you probably don't like it after a while, you stop playing it. Difference is, I'm still playing this, I'm dealing with all the freezing, I'm dealing with the asset reuse, etc., etc. And a big part of the reason I'm doing that is because playing through the story of the game, and there's a lot of it, is just a lot of fun. Let's get that out of the way right now. The core gameplay is fun. The combat doesn't feel the most responsive. It's actually kind of laggy, but I must say that feeling changes dramatically based on what character you're playing, as does the quality of the story. And playing through the stories and playing through the different classes has been at least a fun experience. I am looking forward to getting to the expansions and seeing how those go as well. The community for the game is kind of all over the place. It's kind of what you would expect in some regards. It's kind of not what you would expect in other regards. If you go to the fleet, which is like the main hub of the game, on the Imperial side, it's a cancerous mess, just like the first area, like zone, or main hub of pretty much any MMO. And this game does split you based on if you're Empire or Republic, by the way. Republic fleet and Republic zones are pretty much like completely dead. I play on Starforge, which is one of the North American servers, and this is a very heavy roleplay server. And I guess that's just like a huge part of this server because guilds advertise constantly. Almost all of the advertisements I see are for roleplay guilds. And the ones that aren't all specify that they are non-RP, whereas most of the RP guilds don't really specify anything. So that adds to the interesting culture of the game. Speaking of interesting culture of the game, if you go to the fleet, there's just this one spot, especially in instance 1, where all the role players and all the individuals that would otherwise just sit in a main city and do nothing but talk in general chat all gather. And next to that, there's a table where players just go and dance with their models, and they'll do that. They'll just space Barbie, as they call it here, their characters, do dancing emotes that they paid cartel coins, aka premium currency, aka potentially real money for, and then people will walk up to them, watch, whisper them very creepy things. Some players will go up to them and tip them like they're walking into a strip club or something. I've gotten to talk a lot to the dancers, and I learned some people go up to them and try to pay them for ERP. And apparently that's pretty normal to sell there. It's terrifying. This is absolutely terrifying to me. No doubt, I just somehow convinced someone to download this game right now and go to this table to try to get some of that though. Willing to bet. One thing that affects literally everything I've talked about right now, from the content you do, the rewards you get, the gear grind, and what you have to pay for and buy, is the prices. There's things that you can sell to other players. Usually you're selling things for credits. Credits in this game are so insanely inflated that any new player coming into the game is gonna have a really hard time getting enough money without grinding dozens or even hundreds of hours, or otherwise purchasing cartel market items and selling those to other players for credits to get the in-game currency, or dancing on the table and selling some quick ERP. All the money in the game is with the players. If you're just playing the content, you'll hardly ever get the money to purchase anything from other players because the economy is just that inflated relative to how much you actually earn from the game due to a bunch of credit exploits and otherwise that have happened in the game's history and never really been fixed. I mean, hell, I finished my level 80 gear grind pretty much completely. The only thing I'm missing are augments that I either have to do so many hours of grinding to try to get the materials to craft and level the crafting skills of, or do even more hours of grinding. I did the math. It would take me 280 raids to earn the money to get the best augments if I wanted to actually max my gear out. Do I need to max my gear out? No, but this is something that just eats away at me every time I play this game. And the economy is kind of something to do with the state of the game. And speaking of the state of the game, as I'm recording this, of course, it's still semi-news that BioWare has no longer maintained ownership of development of this game. Broadsword has been handed the game by EA. Half the staff at BioWare working on this game have either been laid off or moved to other positions within EA, and the future of this game is more uncertain than ever. The devs are asserting over and over again that this is a new beginning, which is smart because nobody wants to invest in an MMORPG that they don't know if it's even going to be around next year, especially one with so much content and so much grind designed to keep you in the game to begin with. Nobody wants to know that that's going to be meaningless. Personally, I think the game's going to be around a while longer. Personally, I've covered most of my thoughts about the game, the content, its community, and everything that I've experienced and had to deal with up to this point. But I hope you've enjoyed my prolonged ramble. I hope you maybe learned something about the game from this, or found some entertainment, or gotten a nice inspiration for some kind of hate comment to leave. I don't know. This has been my experience with the game. This is my thoughts after 1,000 hours. I'm sure I'll have another 1,000 hours at least in this game, so if you're looking forward to maybe trying the game, maybe I'll see you in there. If you already played the game, maybe I'll see you in there. One way or another, thank you guys very much for watching this video, and hopefully I'll see you on another one.